Hello my fellow Tamrielites, welcome to the channel or welcome back. We are standing in one of my storage houses. If you're into housing, you probably have a house that looks like this, stacks of things piled up on top of each other. And, like me, you may have longed for a furnishing bag, something like the crafting bag that provides infinite, constantly available storage for all of your extra furnishing items. However, due to technical issues, a furnishing bag will probably never be a thing. I'll talk more about later, and we can toss around some alternatives that might address the issues and actually work, but unless Sauce really surprises us, a furnishing bag, as the community envisioned it, as I would have liked to have seen it, is not a thing in our near future. Given the current reality, let's talk about alternate ways to do furnishing storage. I don't mean to say that storage houses like this one can or necessarily should be eliminated. This house is always going to be like this. I like having a place where I can put down my big structural items to see how big they are and what shape they are, and I'll never want to build here because, quite appropriately, the sky and lighting feel grim and oppressive. This house, then, is 100% utilitarian, and I'm okay with that. But while this is a storage house, this is also a storage house. Mostly. However, it also has a story. By item count, this house is about 15% story, about 10% display, I'll come back to what I mean by that in a minute, and about 75% storage. The story part is that this home is a merchant caravan stopover protected by my character Zalira Kosades, who will one day be an ancestor of Caius Kosades from TES3 Morrowind. In the way of the Kosades, she is a shady but somehow noble character, and she and her family are Imperial loyalists. Her father is an espionage type who is involved with helping citizens escape the Imperial City, and this oasis is part of his smuggling and underground railroad route. There is a manager on site who runs things and oversees operations. He's the one that deals with the merchant caravans, some of whom are just passing through, and some of whom are semi-permanent fixtures in the oasis. There used to be a retired mercenary who provided protection for the place. He made sure no warlords tried to move in and take over. That man passed away, and my character's father asked her to take over the role. Because he loves her and was hoping to see her more, of course, but mostly because he didn't want to lose control of this important nexus on his smuggling web. I've been heading over to this aquarium, and I'll be honest, this is a failed willpower roll is what it is. Back in June I got the Lucent Globe and I immediately wanted to make it into an aquarium, and this house was empty, so I came here to put it together, and then, you'll find this as a theme, I found myself psychologically incapable of removing it. This is a storage home, and there may be a time when I take the aquarium down and move it to another house. But for now, I have item slots, and it makes me happy, and I like thinking of people coming up here to sit in the shade at the end of the day and drink wine while they watch the market. Water is a sign of wealth in this area, so having a huge-ass aquarium is a real statement about how prosperous the place is. And we're just going to go with that until I am forced to take it down. My character Lyra doesn't live here full-time, and I didn't build her any quarters. However, I wanted a sort of thieves' nook in the underground area, a place where illicit goods and people were offloaded in secret. I wanted to use the NPC Thieves Guild vendor Pirane in the marketplace, we'll see her later, so I wasn't sure who to have down here. Then I met Sharp, and I thought Sharp might not mind occasionally working here as part of the Underground Railroad. I'm sure he has little bolt holes in 1,000 places. When he's here, he's got this little nook, and he helps sort smuggled goods or stolen goods, or people, as they come in. And since I adore Sharp and want him to be happy, I blew a few item slots to set him up a little fishing spot on that dock down there. And then over here, where the boat pulls up, I set my closest approximation of the famous twin lanterns. I wish the 2 lanterns from Sharp's quest were available as furnishing items. And that's about the end of the item count devoted to story. Going back up to the courtyard, I started out in this area by bringing over all of my tents and awnings that were in my Coldharbour storage house. A couple of merchant stalls would be a pain to remove at this point, and I probably won't ever, but the tents are all up for grabs if I need to use them in other homes. Most of the items stored here are my crafting-related clutter items and little containers. Blacksmithing items, rocks, and crystals are mostly over in the corner, though as you saw, a lot of the big blue spires are buried into the blue crystals in the caves below. I don't dislike them down there, but I also won't be sad as I take them into different homes and the caves get darker. Having them all up here was just too much. Down below in the corner, we have clothing and alchemy extras on the right-hand side of the stairs. I use these items pretty frequently and wanted them close to the entrance. Also, I prefer to have the clothing items on the stone floor and a carpet rather than directly on the sand. It also seems to make sense to have the alchemy items against wall rather than living their fragile little lives away from wind protection. On the left side of the main stairs, we've got what I think of as my shiny clutter treasure hoard. Items come and go out of this tent all the time as I acquire and use pieces. Since this is the pile I sort through most often, I put it right next to the stairs. The counters and bookcases, by the way, are also leftovers from other builds. My goal when setting this house up was to build as few new items as possible. I couldn't resist putting up one of the bone merchant stalls, and then we've got the tent with all my enchanting-related clutter, including my cart full of crates full of soul gems. Then there's the merchant stall with little containers, a tent with some random extra antiquities, and then the merchant who sells music boxes. And here's why Purani couldn't be in the caves below. It turns out she has a passionate side hustle throwing clay. I'm sure it has nothing to do with making secret hidden compartments inside the urns. And lastly, we have the tent of smoke and incense. I said before that the house is about 10% display. Here's what I mean. A furnishing bag solves two problems, not one. The first is about inventory limitations and access. The second problem is a matter of being able to see your furnishing palette when choosing items. I personally love to use incense in homes because I like the movement. Any and all movement you can put into a home increases how alive it feels. So my homes have incense, and I'm always asking questions. How wide is the smoke? How much space does it take up, both vertically and horizontally? How many embers are there? All kinds of questions. This tent holds one of almost every incense burner, definitely one of all my favorites, and it answers those questions. I can come here, look at the pieces side by side, maybe even pick up a couple, take them back to the home I'm working on and try them out in the space. Then I return them here and make the one I want. You can reinterpret this idea in a lot of different ways. For instance, you could create a clothing shop in a small home that just stores clothing-related clutter. The point I want to make here is that yes, I did lose some item count to those story items. It's a trade-off. What I got in exchange is that I love coming to this house when I do. It feels like a house, like a real house, not just a storage house. And when I'm here, I don't lose immersion in the world. To me, this place makes sense in Tamriel. And in a purely functional sense, what I lost in item count, I kind of make up for by the fact that it's so much easier to remember what items are here and precisely where they are. The story and organization gives it a context that provides a mnemonic framework. My clothing extras are at the clothing supplies vendor. Of course they are. The little things are on tables. Nothing is buried invisibly inside anything else. I love how beautiful this place looks, to me at least, but the pure blissful functionality of it makes me happy in my little OCD soul. I said I was going to show you 3 kinds of storage homes. This was the first. As we're hopping over to the next, I'll do that YouTuber thing and mention that there are like and subscribe buttons you can click if you're finding this interesting, entertaining, or useful. Every click prompts the algorithm to promote the video. And here we are at the new place. This is my Daggerfall Overlook, or as I think of it, my crafting hall. As you may have gathered from our tour of Swordsinger's Redoubt, I like crafting and crafting clutter. I have crafting areas in all my homes to some extent or another, and I absolutely love all the beautiful crafting clutter we have access to. But without a furnishing bag to easily search and compare, it is really difficult to remember all the options and easy to keep using the same things over and over. The previous house was mostly storage, some story, a little display. This house is 90% display. For most of the crafting types, I have one of every single furnishing item related to that skill on display. This house serves as my palette for crafting clutter. I strongly dislike loading screens in my homes, and originally I wanted to build this crafting display home in a house like Pariah's Pinnacle where you port indoors but the space also opens up to the outside. I couldn't find another house that worked, and I got tired of waiting for Pariah's Pinnacle to come back to the Crown Store, so I went with this one. I knew I wanted my transmute station in the crafting hall, and I wanted it outside near the Colovian Glassmaker's Forge, and I wanted the transmute station in an area where I actually make gear for characters alongside all of the other crafting stations. Those needs and my dislike of loading screens meant that this courtyard area needed to have all 7 crafting stations represented with some appropriate clutter. However, there wasn't enough space out here to put in all of the crafting clutter, so I had to break it up. Most of the items I put outside are big and clunky and would have been hard to display properly inside. So we've got the huge Dark Brotherhood wine cask, all the crystals, rocks, and chunky blacksmithing items, plus the forge. Most of the items that go into the small story item count allotment are out here, such as the flag strings from Fargrave and the wooden trellis structures. Daggerfall Overlook is obviously a noble's home, and I wanted to help this outside entry sell the idea of it being a merchant setting instead. I don't know how well I did that, but that was the goal. Basically, this courtyard is kind of built of compromise, but I don't hate it, and it is functional. I don't love that the separate indoor-outdoor areas mean that each crafting category has items in 2 different places, but the outside does look pretty and it's a nice place to build gear. Not too spread out, but enough so to give each crafting station its own feel. With that, let's head inside. I always like to have a merchant and banker near the entrance, but this was kind of an accident. I put them in the hall to keep them out of the way, and then it was just so dramatic looking I had to run with it. We enter the main hall to find the provisioning restaurant area with our little bakery in the corner. I didn't use any of the large, beautiful Grandmaster crafting stations here, but most other versions of the crafting stations are represented. I'm forever confusing the Druidic and Galen provisioning stations, for example, so I made sure to have them near each other so that I could compare them. I included each of my favorite place settings with utensils and each one of all the cookware that I could find, and I made sure to display each one of the items that I have had questions about in the past, like the cleaver and butcher knives, and the dwarven sieve-looking thing, which I always think is going to be different than it is for some reason. Right now, I have one of each of the anniversary cakes on display, but generally speaking, if I'm going to use one of those in the house, it's for a specific reason, and I know which one I want. So having these here is, admittedly, of limited use, and I might remove several at some point if I need item count. I made a Redguard grill because I am forever misjudging how small they are, and I have purchased them for homes and then removed them, so now I have a hard time remembering where one is to look at when I'm wondering if I want to use it. Now there's one here, forever, both the grill and the counter. Then there's the wine and cheese shop, which has every bottle of wine in the game, loosely organized by set. Which one is larger? Which has the better looking label? Which is the most shiny? Which is the smallest? How blue is that blue? All my questions about wine bottles answered in one place. This little corner also has each one of the Khajiit amber bottles because I never can remember if it's the vase or the vessel or the craft that I want. Yes, there are preview functions, but they don't always work for alchemy or enchanting, and those menus can be hard to search for visuals. There are 10 of these bottles, and now they are all here to compare side by side. Makes me happy. Speaking of happy, it is finally time to look at the alchemy lab. One of all the alchemy things all in one place. I mean, except for the alchemy stuff that's out in the courtyard. But as much as I may fuss over that, what happened here with this house is that the very second I realized I could turn the throne room into a terrarium, I was done. And this house was my crafting hall. So, courtyard, division of items, loading screen, another failed willpower roll, blah, blah, blah. Look at my alchemy lab. I love it. I love it so much. My terrarium is so pretty. And yeah, the shelf of empty glass bottles is outside in one of the big Fargo terrariums, but here's all the alchemy devices side by side, including the ones I always forget that I can make. There's all of the plant-related achievement furnishings, like that poisonous flower from Galen or High Isle, and the lighting. Oh my gosh, the lighting in this game is its own kind of art form. And while I'm fangirling, let me say that the sound effects in this strangle plant are crazy vicious. I was working in here with no music on, and every time that plant growled, it made me jump a little. There are a few other plants that I could add, but as much as I love the terrarium, it's more important to get in all the tools and equipment. Overall, the workspaces are not as elegantly decorated as they could have been, but the priority was making sure, again, that I had one of everything I wanted on display. The fact that it works out even as well as it does, well, to me anyway, is just a bonus. We're going to leave the first floor now and head downstairs, where we'll find the blacksmithing, enchanting, and woodworking areas. There's also a lot of enchanting clutter upstairs near the jewelry crafting station. Generally speaking, I put the darker items in the basement and the things that don't look potentially evil upstairs, but there's some waffle on that as I needed to play around with placement in order to make the lighting work. But here's where we have the Daedric Enchanting Station and Black Soul Gems, as well as some of the larger crystal and gem items like the replica of the False Tower and the Void Crystal Anomaly from Coldharbour. Looking at the tool counter now, I realize I need to finesse the placement of a couple of those pieces. The one partially buried sword is the Craglorn sword sconce from the luxury vendor, with the rest of the sconce buried in the counter so just one sword shows. It's finicky to do because the swords cross and touch each other and it looks like I didn't get it quite right. Over in the corner, we have the High Isle woodworking station, which is gorgeous. I love the fact that it has its own light source. Also in this corner is one of the clockwork machines with an on-off lever. I don't have this one set to turn anything in the area on or off, but I've used it in other houses and wanted it near the other items I often use as components, which is what I've stacked up on this side of the area. Some of the things that are here are undaunted trophies, and I've sunk the wooden plaque into something to hide it. I don't have every single clockwork or dwarven part represented here, but most of the items shown are things I have a stack of in my Coldharbour house, so if I have a chance to use them in something, I want to grab them first. Therefore, I made sure I could see them. Again, this is maybe not the most beautiful use of this space, and if I could pare the items down or double the size of the room, it could have looked better. But the point was one of most everything, and that's what we've got. And while I don't love it as much as the Alchemy Lab, I do like it quite a lot. And I'm very happy I got to use the Chain Link Deadlands rug, I guess we're calling it. Whatever, I really like those, and I'm glad it's here. With that, let's head upstairs. Hey, déjà vu. Upstairs are the jewelry and clothing stations, as well as the remaining enchanting clutter. I debated a long time about whether to use the hanging signs in the stairwell or representational items like these to indicate what is on each floor, and I finally decided to ditch the hanging signs in favor of using clutter I wanted anyway. I know the signs exist, I won't forget them, but I also don't use them in most houses, so it's okay that they aren't on display here. The standard jewelry crafting station is outside, so up here we have the Apocrypha jewelry station, which I quite like, but it is a bit large for the room. Some of the tools might qualify as blacksmithing tools, but I think the more delicate items work in this context. I am also using here a few pieces that aren't what they look like. I wanted something that looked like a jeweler's bar of metal, for example, so I turned one of the metallic orc seals on its edge and buried it into the counter. That's something I've done in other houses, so those orc seals are kind of an unofficial part of my jewelry crafting clutter now. Over in the corner, the bookshelf holds one of each size of soul gem and other clutter that I like to use in my jewelry and enchanting areas. That Allied star on the wall, by the way, is one of the antiquities that can be crafted from recipes found as bonus items while excavating antiquities. Let me repeat, the star is not an antiquity itself, but the plan to craft it is found as one of the 3 possible bonus items you can uncover while excavating antiquities. That can only happen in Gold Coast, Westweald, and Blackwood, but the plans are not bound and they can be purchased off guild traders. Both the star and the cracked crystal that was down in the blacksmithing area are sourced this way. And that's enough of that. Let's take a look at our last area here for the clothing station. Again, the regular one is outside and the Apocrypha station is a bit large, but I also love it here with the terrarium in the background. The clockwork spinning wheel and loom share the left-hand side of the space with the clockwork dressing rooms. The wooden solitude dressing rooms are outside. We've also got the clockwork dressing mannequin and another dress mannequin that I made out of clockwork factotum parts and elsewhere fabric, which means it technically isn't a clutter piece and I might at some point move it to another home, but for now I'll leave it here. On the back wall, we've got a little vanity with mysterious potions and little containers of perfumes and cosmetics. I believe the beautiful little bottles can be found by pickpocketing it elsewhere, so you might want to check guild traders for them, or you can purchase them from the Crown Store tab in the housing editor. Then we've got piles of rugs on the floor from the luxury vendor, the Solitude Loom, and a couple of countertops full of clothing clutter. Technically, the scissors I have there are glass snips from Westweald, but they sell as scissors well enough. Also, the large spool of white thread is bookbinding thread from Apocrypha, but I feel like it works here. And that's the end of this house, my crafting hall and crafting clutter display storage house. Just the veneer of a vague story about crafting merchants and an obsessive crawl through each one of the crafting station furnishing lists, achievement vendors, luxury vendor items, stealable item lists, and so on and so on. It was a hassle. Now it's done and it has already been so useful to me. And because I did it, you don't have to. It's open in the house tour system, so come by and look when you need to. I have item count left and some fluff I can pull as needed, so the house will stay updated for a while as new items are released. And that brings us to the third storage house on my list, which is the Hall of the Lunar Champion. So, speaking of failed willpower rolls, I had a really good plan for this house. The shrines in Rimmen are right outside, so I always port to the exterior of the Hall of the Lunar Champion when I want shrines. I originally decided, therefore, to make the hall my crafting hall so that I could come here to make gear and do build changes, and I had other good, logical ideas that would use the space. And all of those plans crashed and burned the instant I realized an Alinor greenhouse fits exactly into the central square of the hall, and that I could make one of those into an aquarium. This was not really a failed willpower roll, it was a botch. I stopped construction and literally spent years waiting for this dumb fish tank idea to go away so I could have my crafting hall because it soaked up too much item count. I couldn't make the crafting hall you just saw and have the aquarium too. And as the months and months went by, I realized this interior space was too small for all the items you just saw in Daggerfall Overlook anyway, and if I wanted the crafting display here, I'd have to leave the beams of light on and use the side areas behind the loading screen doors, which you already know I don't love to do. With the competing idea of the aquarium demanding headspace, that was too many hurdles. So earlier this year, I finally just gave in, made the damn aquarium, which I fetching love, so whatever, and then asked myself what I was going to do with the rest of it. So, who wants to spend a day looking in an aquarium? Well, obviously a bunch of sugared up Khajiit are the ones who do that, and then I saw that I could make little shrines in the places that used to be doorways, and Kunzari followed Azura, so why not do an homage to Azura and her two sisters? Yeah, those little shrines are probably forbidden by the Riddlethar, but this is clearly a place where shady people do shady things in quiet corners, and the mix of sacred and profane just feels right up the Khajiit alley. In addition to the aquarium, there's a bar, a grill, a little bakery sweet shop, and gaming tables. But why are we here? We're here because this is also a storage house. All of my extra rugs are here. All of my extra pillows live here until they are repurposed, and there is at least one of every pillow in the game that I like to use somewhere in this room. Like the Daggerfall Overlook wine and cheese shop, the bar area has one of every bottle available in the game. My extra empty glasses are on the cupboard by the bar, and I also have one of every drinking glass that has liquid in it. The full glasses that are cheaper to make are on or near the bar, and as you go counterclockwise around the hall, the glasses require more expensive mats. I also have one of every game available in ESO in this hall. In functional terms, and again because of the context, I am always able to easily remember that this is the house where all the extra rugs and pillows live. The extras will come and go, some are definitely only here for storage, but there's nothing here that feels stacked up or clunky to me. I will always remember that all of the filled glasses are here to look at, and all of my extra empty glasses are in the cupboard. I don't have to port around, I don't even have to use inventory insight. Between these three houses, I hope I've given you some new perspective on what a storage house can be. If you've watched this long, if this is the problem that you're on the internet to solve, then you love housing more than enough to come up with a story concept to drape over a storage house. Honestly, I did the crafting clutter so you don't have to, but maybe you would prefer to have, 5 houses, each one dedicated to 1 or 2 crafting stations and a display of associated clutter with all of your extras for that craft stored there. Maybe you have a bunch of wanted posters you've stolen and you want to set up a thieves' oasis type space attached to a warehouse with your stored items arranged like the thieves are unpacking, sorting, and shipping them off. Maybe you have too many plants to keep track of, so you want to set up a garden greenhouse somewhere like Moonsugar Meadow where you set out a display of all your favorites divided into separate environmental biomes. Again, if you're watching this, you've probably spent a straight hour of your life moving an object 7 pixels to the right and left again, and if that's true, then I would be willing to bet that you will enjoy walking into a storage house that has a story and looks nice to you a lot more than you will a place with stacks of things thrown about. And while it may seem like a hassle to have a bunch of storage houses with a bunch of item count lost to story instead of just 1 or 2 to port to, I would counter that the organization, really knowing where things are, has saved me enough time to make up for extra porting, as much as I hate it. And I do hate it, don't misunderstand. I would also argue that because I enjoy the houses so much more, it doesn't feel as much like a chore to port into them and find things. Before I wrap up this part, I want to cover a few more tips and tricks with regards to managing furnishing inventories. Some furnishings are bound to you when you pick them up, and if you buy a house with crowns, the furnishings in it will be bound to you. Bound items do not stack with the same item if it is unbound. If you put some of the candles from a crowned purchase store into your bank and then later craft some of those same candles and put those in the bank, they will take up 2 inventory slots, not 1. It is worth taking a look at your bank and storage containers to make sure that you aren't burning extra slots because of this. In that vein, also take a look at your storage containers, if you use any to store furnishing items, and make sure that you don't have another stack of that same thing in the bank or in another container or loose in houses. I believe it's the add-on Inventory Insight that's telling me the location of the furnishings. While you're looking through your storage containers and bank, look especially close at any items that are singles, not stacks. Storage containers and the bank make the most sense for things you have stacks of. If you're wasting an inventory slot on a single item, consider putting it down in a house. And the opposite is also true. If you have a stack of things in a house, consider moving those things to a storage container where they will only take 1 spot. Consider smaller storage houses as well, especially for things you aren't likely to need often. There are a number of small and medium houses you can buy for gold that provide really convenient porting spots, like Snugpod near Eldenroot, Moonmirth on Canarthy's Roost, or the Sisters of the Sands apartment in Sentinel. I love being able to port inside the inn where the Alakir Tales of Tribute games are, and that apartment is where I store the 100 antiquity maps that I'm not using in homes. If you don't already use the add-on Inventory Insight, I would recommend trying it out. It will help you find anything in any of your inventories, whether that thing is in a house, the bank, a storage container, or on another tune. It's immensely valuable for managing all of your inventories, including housing. So, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned selling extras or destroying things. That isn't really how I roll, but I feel I should put it on the list because some people do that. Not me, I might need those things. I am not a hoarder in real life, but I grew up with one. I keep my physical places neat because stacks of things give me flashbacks, but all MMOs require a certain amount of that collector bug, that urge to stack resources. It's always a trade-off with time, and usually I don't let myself be a completist or collector, but now and then I like to indulge my inner collector and keep all of the things. So, yeah. Some people might find storage, especially at this level, totally unnecessary and they just get rid of extras, but I'm not that person. If you are, I kind of admire you, but I also try not to think too hard about it because I might have wanted that thing you just destroyed. So I'm going to assume that you did not destroy it, but instead put it up on a guild trader and someone else loves it now. I'm going to wrap up with a few minutes discussing the furnishing bag. I personally was a huge fan of the concept of the furnishing bag, but as I understand it, the server limitations simply will not allow that. It seems at first like something comparable to the crafting bag, but in terms of the numbers of lines of discrete inventory items, the scope of a furnishing bag is exponentially larger, and growing all the time. I am probably mangling this, but as I understand it, a furnishing bag would move that data from the client side to the server side, at which point the server collapses under the weight. I do hope at some point ZOS will devise a workaround, but for the time being, the furnishing bag dream is not really a valid one. So let's look sideways at this problem. Think for a moment of the furnishing bag as a metaphor of a solution rather than the solution itself. What do you, as a player, get out of a furnishing bag? Inventory space, obviously. But technically, you could keep buying houses and stacking things up. The reason that isn't a great long-term solution is that it creates a situation where you not only have to remember how to find things, but you also have to port around for hours gathering things up before starting every build. It isn't the inventory space, it's accessing that inventory that is the issue. The other goal is to see the available palette. With a furnishing bag and infinite inventory space accessible from the bank, I could, for example, make one of every single light source, drop them into the bag, and then be able to compare light intensity and color on the fly as I was building. So let's brainstorm some alternate ideas based on those two goals. First of all, accessing inventory. A furnishing bag would give us instant access to infinite furnishing-only bank space from any house. What else comes close to that? The next easiest thing, for me, would be if I could access the inventory in all of my other houses through the housing editor, pull those pieces to me no matter which house I was in. I would still have to store the things, yes. Part of the problem is that my character can only pick up and transport so many pieces at once, usually 100 or 150 max. For a 700 count house, I might try 1,000 things to find the 700 I want to use. That means I'm porting over and over and over to gather up pieces, and that's consuming literal hours of my game time, which at the end of the day is always our most precious resource. Moving on, assuming that instant, seamless access to the inventory in all of my storage homes is also not really a thing that can happen, what else addresses inventory access? If porting back and forth because I can't carry all items is a pain point, which it is, then another possible solution is a huge, and I mean house-sized, storage container that will only hold furnishing items. If I'm building, say, a huge aquarium that will require testing dozens and dozens of different items that then won't fit and have to be returned, it would be great if I could gather up, buy, craft, whatever, find the items, and dump them all into a single storage container that could hold at least 500 slots instead of 60? Dare I say 1,000? A variation of this would be to have a bank-based furnishing bag but cap the number of inventory items at 500 or 1,000 lines instead of making it infinite. Another option, and I hope by now you appreciate the stretch that this is for me, would be to allow us to deconstruct furnishing items. So, yeah, I rub every piece of furnishing and call it my precious, and I'm not even going to pretend I don't. And yes, I absolutely do get a vicarious virtual thrill of being able to hoard every little thing in a way I would never do in real life. But despite all that, if I had a chance of reclaiming furnishing mats by deconning, I absolutely would decon several houses worth of items. It would free up a ton of my space. But I am not going to just destroy or sell those things because I used mats or time to get them, and if I come up with a need for them, I will kick myself for wasting relatively precious resources. I go through housing mats. They matter to me. If I could decon furnishings and get something back, that would take the sting out of it and my inventory would reduce. Dramatically increasing our access to our own inventory on the fly during a build will also go a long way towards addressing the second goal I stated, which is to have greater access to our available palette. But there are other ways to dramatically help with that specifically. In the Housing Editor, under the Crown Store tab, we have the ability to preview placement of an item. I want to start by pointing this out in case you weren't aware of the possibilities available. If you know you want a table, but you don't know which is large enough or which wood will match, you can go to the table section of the menu and start previewing the placement of what's available there. This can be hugely helpful, especially when you're starting a build. I want to be clear, though, that once you've located the piece you like, spending crowns to buy it should be your last resort. You will find items that are only available that way, and you'll need to decide if that specific piece is worth the price to you or whether you can make do with something else. But most of the time, once you've located the thing you want, you'll either be able to make it yourself or you'll find one already made on a guild trader, or you might decide to buy the plan so you can make it in the future. You could also ask a guildmate. If the item is expensive, it's a good idea to Google it and find the drop source to see if it's possible to farm the item or the plan for it. So that's a great tool, but the problem is that not every item is available in the Housing Editor Crown Store at any particular time. I would love to see some kind of interface added that would allow us to see every single furnishing item available in the game, no matter the source, and allow us to preview that piece in our home. When people say palette, what I believe we mean is better visibility for what's available. The various menus in the crafting stations and Housing Editor and the general inability to tell what's out there make the system more opaque and less user-friendly than it needs to be. Some kind of global furnishing wiki with a placement preview within the game would be a godsend. I do understand Google exists, I know how to use it, I totally get that. But I also am kind of a menu junkie, and I can see that the user interface in the housing system is not as user-friendly as it could be. I am a total sucker for a good index and some sexy cross-referencing. And that's where I'm wrapping up. I hope the video was helpful and gave you some different ways to think about your storage houses, which aren't going to go away anytime soon. If you've got additional ideas to share about managing furnishings inventory, please let us all know in the comments. By the way, all the houses in the video except for Coldharbour are listed in home tours. You can sort by @Zells to find my builds, and if you decide to stop by, I hope you enjoy your visit. And that's it for now. I appreciate that you spent part of your day in my little corner of the interwebs. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, may all your loots be leet.